And the disclaimer here is simply that this workshop is not intended to promote a change of model for your church. And it's not to champion a new terminology or call ourselves a parish church or anything like that. It is intended to get you thinking about effective community engagement and a more focused ministry for your church. The important factor here is not the terminology, but the concepts and its implication to the ministry. So in terms of background, I have when I planted CFC, before I decided to plant the CFC, I was looking around to see what do I want to do, what kind of church do we want to do, how do we want to operate. And the concept of a parish really spoke to me. And so I want to unpack some of the things, some of the study that I did as a church planter, and how this can really revitalize the life of a church if we really were to think about it. So I don't want you to get hung up on the word parish at all. You can call it whatever you want to call it, community, whatever it is, the terminology you want to use. This is just, it was just a way of explaining where this whole concept is coming from. So I wanted to do a few things today. The first thing was give a definition of parish, both for a historical point of view and also from the purposes of this workshop as well. To take a look at the gifts of historically, the gifts that came out of the parish model, the powerful, meaningful presence, becoming an effective parish church or community church, whatever you call it, and making 1-degree shifts in the ministry so you can get there. So those are the things we want to accomplish if we can in the next 45 minutes. Stop me at any time. I know that at the end there's going to be time for a question and answer. But the way I like to do things is that if at any time there's something that pops up in your mind and you want to ask a question, just let me know, and then we'll stop and we'll talk about it right there. Okay, so next, the definition of parish. The word parish comes from the Greek, I think it says paroikia, and it means sojourning in a foreign land. To mean that if we are strangers in a location, we are to care for one another, support one another, fellowship with one another. That's where the word parish comes from in a historical way. In England, it was modeled after the Saxon township, where the lord had its big house, who then took care of all the many other houses in that township. So that's how the parish model was formatted. The word parish is a church territorial entity, so there is a geographical boundary that a church was responsible for. The parish church was a church at the center of a geographical boundary with responsibilities for caring for those within its boundary. In a lot of cases, the church in a village was built to be the tallest building in that village. So, and then when that didn't meet the prerequisite, they would then have the tallest steeple that they could do, and then put a cross in there. And the reality is that people could see from anywhere in that village that the church was the center of life in a village. So that's the concept of parish. So the church at the center of that village. But for our purposes, what we want to talk is a way of identifying what is the place of the geographical boundaries that God is calling you to minister with, and then becoming actively involved in the betterment of that area. That's what we want to talk about today. Okay, any questions so far? There are two books that have really influenced my ministry. One was called The Great Giveaway, and the other one was called What Has Christianity Done for Us? I meant to put those two books up. There's a picture in my thing, but I forgot. So don't ask me what the authors, I can't remember their names, but it's not something you can easily find, those two books, but they talk about the history of the influence of the church over the decades and how the church was the center from which many things came from. And then the other book called The Great Giveaway, it's how the church has lost its influence by giving away the responsibilities it had towards its community. slowly and saying, hey, we are going to concentrate only on the preaching of the gospel, but everything else is the responsibility of government, the responsibility of other entities. We're spinning off entities, we're creating other things that will look after this so we can only do the preaching of the gospel. So the Great Giveaway really impacted me when I began to do ministry. And I said, hey, is there a way we can recover some of the giveaways that we have given? So, in a nutshell, some of the gifts of the church over the years were these things here. First of all, medical care. It was in a parish church where there were people that when people were sick, and they were sick sometimes from diseases that were contagious to others, the church was the only place that would accept them and care for them. So the idea of nursing people back to health comes out of this concept of people being able to, so the churches became a center of healing for people. Many discoveries were done by nuns and priests who began to experiment with plants and other things towards the healing of people that were sick, and then afterwards, discoveries were made that those plants and those things were things that were necessary for the medicines we have today. So that the church was at the center of the medical care for their community, and people knew that if they were sick, if they needed something, they would be there. Next one is education. Church was also at the center of education. Church began to develop a way of helping people understand their needs and educate them towards reading and a number of other things. Later on, we know that churches became the place where we, when the printing began to evolve. The idea of we need to create something that will print Bibles, but then became the place where books were printed from. So this whole center of education comes out of the concept of the church being at the center and having a responsibility for educating the people around them. Not just education in forms of in a way that informs reading, but also agricultural education. And other types of education that were to serve for the betterment of people's lives. The church was involved in all of these things. It was part of their DNA. They understood that being a church that brings the kingdom of God means being a church that will do these kinds of things. Okay? Economy. This is really, really interesting because the churches in villages begin to realize that there is a lot of poverty. So what they would do is they will create micro business for that certain village. For example, certain churches begin to produce some of the best cheeses in the world, right? So they became very active in doing cheese. Others became began to bake bread, and bread was very important. They were known across farther lands, and people would come to that church to buy those things. Wine is another one, right? So they would make wine, and they would sell wine, and that's all for the good and the betterment of the society around them. Which reminds me of the prophet Jeremiah prophesied and said that when you're in a city, look for the prosperity of the city, work towards the prosperity of the city. So this is the concept behind it. So those churches were heavily involved in things of helping the economy around the areas where they were at. Social construct, things like orphanage, taking care of the elderly. These are all concepts that came out of the church. The church began to see, hey, there's a need here, let's do this, let's create this, let's do that, let's become responsible for this. This is all of the things that we now see at the purview of government, all of these social agencies that exist at the purview of the government, they all came out of the church concept. The church began this process. So that, therefore, the title for the book, The Great Giveaway. When the church began to do this, the church was very relevant. If a church in a city or in a town would close its door, that village would pretty much die. That's how important the church was for them. Art and music, it's another one. You know, church is very involved in teaching people music and creating spaces where music would be heard. Art project, calling out artists, paying artists, doing all kinds of things that would enhance the artistic look and feel of their community. Many innovations were done by the church. But things like the understanding of the creation of cork for wine, for example, those kind of things, innovations come out of the church. So there are many things that were developed because of the church and by the efforts of the church. Record keeping, that is an interesting one. In England, for example, the Parish church, some of the earliest records were found in the side of the pages of a Bible from a parish priest who said that today so-and-so was baptized, or today funeral for so-and-so. So the pages of that Bible was full of these little records of people who had died or given birth or were baptized. And then, therefore, the church began to create these spaces where they would now create records for when the baby was born, what it was called, when it was baptized, when died, marriages, all of these records that now, we take very good care of them from the government perspective of things. It was all kind of kept by the church parish. And of course, there is the spiritual care people. Churches were there to give them spiritual care. But they found that to give spiritual care, you could not neglect any of these other areas. That you couldn't separate spiritual care from any of these other pieces. And it's only by doing all of these other pieces that you are actually giving spiritual care to people. So in reading this concept, both in this book, What Christianity Has Done for Us, and The Great Giveaway, I was shocked because I had never thought about the church this way. Never. I thought I'm going to take my theological courses, I'm going to learn how to preach, and I'm going to be a good preacher, and that's what I'm meant to do, meant to be. But in reading all of this, I began to realize the need for the church to offer spiritual care, which encompasses all of these areas. And by the way, more and more, the government can't do it. More and more, it becomes an impossibility for the government to take care of the poor and to take care of the hurting and all of those things. So the church needs to find a way of regaining its place within the needs of the community. So when we planted CFC, the first thing I said to the 5 families that were with us, I said that there are 7 different communities, community centers around us here. There's 7 different ones. And so if you're going to be a part of the leadership of this church, you have to volunteer in one of those community centers. And so, we had one person that was the president of a community center, the other one was treasurer, the other one. So we began to notice the needs that existed around those communities. My wife happened to begin to be a part of a school, just down the street from us, and she began to volunteer there every day. She would volunteer at that school. One day I came home and she was crying. And I said, "What's going on?" She says, "Oh, it's okay." I said, "What's going on?" She says, "I was so sad today. There were 5 children in this one classroom I was working with that they didn't bring them to lunch. They haven't had any breakfast, and they were going to go home, and they didn't know if there would be food ready for them." So the teacher was cutting this one orange in many different pieces. Her orange and her sandwich, the teacher was cutting different pieces for these kids. And the teacher said this happens all the time. So today I didn't bring more food, but I typically bring more food. So she came to me and she said this, and she starts weeping. I started weeping, and I said, "How can this happen in our watch as a church?" So I went back to the board of the church, and I said, "This cannot happen in our watch." And we were a small church of about 30 people with very, very limited funding. And I said to them, what if we committed to do a breakfast program every second day in that school? A significant breakfast program in that school. And they said, let's do it. So we started in one school, and we were feeding 40 kids every second day. It became every day. And then we got a call from another school down the road from that school and said, if you're doing that there, we have this good need here too. So this small church of 30 people, now we're doing breakfast programs in 2 schools, feeding somewhere between 80 to 100 kids every day. Every day, volunteer. And we never had, we never were short of funding for that program. Never. Every time we thought we were going to run out of food or something, God would provide. Somebody would say, here's another $5,000 for you to buy bread or cereal or something. We had our shelves stocked in the church because we were using it, and every time we ended up buying new fridge, new stoves, new things for these schools because we were getting the funding and we needed for the cooking and the breakfast. We were buying these things for these schools. This is a church of 30 people that could have said, we don't have enough and we can't do it. What happened is over the span of 1 year, our church grew to about 150 people. Most of them were parents of kids who were going to the school, now interacting with us. And the kids were saying, you know, Mrs. DaSilva, she was saying to my wife, so you do stuff in your church, can I come? So we had to get a bus, and we had to get a van, and we were picking up people, and we were bringing people to church who were, our connection was through these 2 schools, because we began to engage with a community. So it's important for us to realize that if we are to be the people of God, if we are to showcase the kingdom of God, we got to do that from all aspects, not just from the biblical, here's the Bible, here's what it says, but from all the aspects. I said to the group in the church, I said, I think that if people were to see the kingdom, they want to know the king. And that became a phrase that we really used a lot in our church. If people were to see the kingdom, they want to know the king. People don't come to Jesus because they don't see the kingdom that he is to bring. But if a church begins to look at all of these aspects, and as much as it can, begin to become part of the fiber of the community, become so relevant in that community, begins to reach in a way, people are going to say, hey, you doing this, there's something different about you. Right? There's something different about you. So that's the historical piece of this whole concept of parish that happened, and slowly over the years the church began to give away its responsibility and in a lot of cases lose its importance. Think to today. So if you go from a place where the village or the town would give the place of prominence to the church and say, hey, you got to be the tallest building in the village, to now a modern way of doing cities where there's no place for you to build a church. So all of our new neighborhoods were sprawling neighborhoods. There are no place for church. There is, because people are looking at church and saying you're just not relevant. There is no need. So how do we rediscover? So I'm not, the idea here is not that I'm telling you just go back and do this, but can we be challenged to start thinking differently about the place of the church in the communities that we live in? And if we are to do that, we have to have meaningful presence. We got to have presence. So our churches can't be churches. We can't just be Sunday churches. We can't just be churches that gather on a Sunday and have a good time with ourselves, and hopefully somebody from the community will show up and sit on the last pew, and maybe they will like us enough that they will come back. We got to have a meaningful presence in our communities. So here's an idea: the idea of building a spiritual front porch. This is a concept that we do with our 5 C's. So what's a spiritual front porch? Another book that really impacted me. It was a book that I picked up to read that I don't know why I picked it up. It just looked appealing. It had this old front porch falling apart in the front of the cover, and it says The History of Front Porch. That's the name of the book. The History of Front Porch. I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. And here's the gist, the 200-something pages of this book says this. For most of the early centuries in the U.S. and North America, the front porch was very important because homes were small and front porches became the sorting spaces for people. So instead of having everybody come into your home, you now would take your family outside and sit on the front porch, and everybody would sit on the front porch. And there was this interaction between the internal, the family, and the external, the community. And so there was a place where that exchange would take place. And then the author begins to say there were a number of things that began to kill off the front porch. And the first one was transportation. So when you begin to have things like cars and other means of transportation, you're no longer sitting in your porch, but now you decide, I'm going to go to this next town, or I'm going to go over there. So your porch is empty. The second thing that happened to kill the front porch was the invention of the air conditioning, because it was cooler to be inside than it was to be outside. So you were more comfortable inside. So mobility was one, comfort was the other. And the third thing that killed the front porch was the invention of television, because now you entertain inside. So entertainment, comfort, and mobility killed the front porch. Sometimes, I think, spiritually, this has happened to our churches, because we have become more comfortable inside. We know what we do. We entertain ourselves inside. And we also, if we don't like what's happening in this church, we pick up our car and we go to another church. If we don't like the sermon today, we're going to go hear somebody else, and we're going to move. And we drive to church and we don't engage with the community around the church. So if we are to rediscover what it means to be a church, we got to develop what's our front porch. What's the place where this whole group of people engage, so the inside engages with the outside. The family and community mingles together. What are those places? What are those places? I think that would be very important for us to begin to dream about what front porches would be like. For us, it was engagement in the community centers around us as we planted the church. We said this is a prerequisite. We have to be part of this. If we're not part of this, we're not part of the leadership of the church. That was how we did it. Because from the beginning of the church, we wanted to create this idea that we are to be the church outside, not just inside. And we are to be mingled with people. The second thing is really take a look at your approach to engaging community. I say there are three different approaches that churches have towards engaging community. The first approach is, I call it the fortress. The fortress is a church that separates themselves, completely separate. The church, the community has no idea what's going on there because they have no interaction with it. We created this fortress around us. You know, we are holy, and therefore we are protected in here. The second approach is the furnace. When we do, we come out with evangelism that is hot and burning. People don't know what to do with us. We just come out and we're hitting people over the head with the Bible, but we haven't created the influences that allows us to share the gospel from a meaningful way. Okay? So we are like furnaces. People, no, too hot. Don't know what to do with it. The third is the fragrance. And the fragrance is what we need to do. The fragrance, they infiltrate. They are everywhere. And there's this beautiful smell that leads people to go, do you smell that? Where's that coming from? So if Jesus is the beautiful fragrance, we are to be that fragrance in the community and begin to infiltrate the parts and lead back to Him. Is that okay? Are you, any questions so far? Be part of community life. Find the ways to be part of the community life. What does it mean to be part of community life? When I talk about community, I'm talking about those outside of the doors, what does it mean to be part of that? How do you engage that? And again, this has to be, so if we're talking about a church, this has to be a collective approach, not the lone wolf. Because many of our churches have the lone wolves that are doing some great stuff connected to the community, and they tell us and we go, oh, that's good, that's very nice. But we haven't commissioned, we haven't resourced, we have not engaged with those people, but we just say, hey, but if somebody asks us a story about a church, oh, so-and-so, he does that kind of stuff. But is that so-and-so? So it has to be collective. What's the collective approach to become part of the community life within your church, within our churches? Have we talked about it? Is it important enough to be part of our bylaws? Do we put in our bylaws and say, hey, part of the work of the church is this, and it has to be up front? Do we have those kinds of engagements? Do we have those kinds of things or not? And then the last is engagement defines influence. So I asked Carson to develop this for me because this has been true for me in my life. The greatest level of engagement is going to lead you to the greatest level of influence. And here's what you can see. If you have low engagement, you're going to see everybody as strangers. As your engagement begins to grow, your influence as well grows. So you have acquaintances, and then you have friends, and then you're going to feel like you're part of the family. Now, when you get to the friend and family, that's when the gospel really has a great deal of influence. When you can share the good news of Jesus with somebody because they know who you are. If you're a stranger and you carry around your Bible, you're crazy. If you're a friend and you open the Bible, you're curious. Because now they begin to say, hey, these people, I know them. They're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with them. If that serves them, maybe there's something there for me. But we try to do all of our evangelism from the low engagement side of things. That's how we do our evangelism, for the low engagement side of things. Instead of doing our evangelism from the high engagement and high influence. The change in how people respond to the gospel in a high engagement, high influence aspect is incredible. It's incredible. So it'll be really good for us to really pay attention to it. So what does it mean, high engagement? It means that you don't just do a VBS once a year and say, we got 300 kids, and then drop the ball. Don't see anybody for the next year. What's the continuity? What's the weekly engagement with people? What is, maybe you don't reach 300 people, maybe you reach 2 families, and you walk with 2 families. You walk with people that are really in need of something. Maybe it's, it's just that one person. But you have this continuity that happens.